Hey there, this is Chanel Dupree, and welcome to Navigating Child Welfare. I help to reduce burnout, isolation, and confusion in the child welfare and foster care system. And later on today, I'll be giving a talk with an organization, Kansas Legal Services, and I'll be talking to their coalition of folks that deal with homelessness. What I'll be talking about is homelessness and foster care. And so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time with you today talking about this very deep and intertwined connection between youth who are involved in the foster care system and homelessness or houselessness, and what that looks like in concern of their experience, why we should care, and some things that I know that are happening at a federal and state level. And then what are the next steps? How do we actually connect well? I believe as a society, we have shared sorrow and shared successes. One of our shared sorrows should be when a youth who was involved in our system, the foster care system, ages out without a plan, ages out and says, I want nothing to do with this system, ages out and is not able to connect to family that can be supportive, ages out and is homeless. That's a shared sorrow. A shared success is when a family experiences a difficult time and they're able to navigate the space of difficulties through the shared support of the community, of government resources, of community resources, through heart resilience, and they make it. They make it and they're able to tell the story, and that story becomes a part of the stick-to-itiveness, of the grit, of the we made it of that family. That's a shared success. And the truth is, homelessness, it impacts us all. And so the worst thing that can happen is we make legal orphans, right? Children age out of our system, out of our foster care system, and they have nowhere to go. What the data tells us about homelessness and incarceration, because I want to talk about those two things, is that for a child who has experienced foster care, 20% by the age of 17 have reported homelessness at any point in their life. And homelessness isn't necessarily always sleeping on the street. It's you don't have a place to call your own. So you're couch surfing, you're staying with friends, you're finding other places to be at so that you don't have to go to sleep, or whatever situation that may be. By the age of 19, 21% of youth involved in foster care have reported homelessness in the previous 2 years. And by the age of 21, 25% have reported homelessness in the previous 2 years. And that's compared to 4% of youth ages 18 to 26 in the general population. And this is from a report through the Chafin Hall in 2017. So it matters. It matters. We care, because when we go back to this concept that we're celebrating, the Declaration of Independence, this document that we're celebrating, this liberation, this freedom, right? 250 years was signed and moved forward in 1776. It's been 250 years. And the most, I believe, famous line of the Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when we think about life, I really think about housing. I really think about stability. I really think about, am I comfortable in a place, in a space? Do I know where I'm going to be? And so homelessness matters in foster care, and it matters for our youth. And so then we think about incarceration and just the barriers that brings to youth who have experienced foster care. And what we know is by the age of 17, 30% of youth involved in foster care have reported incarceration at any point in their life. By the age of 19, 17% have reported incarceration in the previous 2 years. And by the age of 21, 16% have reported incarceration in the previous 2 years. And that's compared to 6.6% of the lifetime incarceration rate in the general population. So nearly 50% of foster youth have an encounter with the criminal legal system by the age of 17. And 17% of the U.S. prison population has spent time in foster care. And this data is coming from the Bureau of Justice Statistics and several other reports. For instance, the Park and Courtney report and paper that was published in 2022. And so incarceration, homelessness, incarceration is also connected to homelessness. When we think about what you need in order to sign a lease, what you need in order to have, in order to obtain funding, charges and incarceration can absolutely impact that as well. And so we should care. We should care because it changes how people move about in our world, in our society. I know I have seen homelessness, and I've seen the increase of homelessness, and then I've seen the response to homelessness. And this is the truth. Typically, when we want for things to look a certain way, and if there is a homeless population, they get moved and they get placed in a different place so that the eyesight is not disrupted. And that's it's a quiet move, but we know that it's something that happens in many of our cities. If you have maybe a big event coming, if something is being built, watch and see what happens to the folks that were there. And so a lot of those folks have experienced foster care. A lot of those folks have experienced incarceration. And so this is a multifaceted issue that typically is not just solved by one thing. And it's why I spend so much time talking about how we need to connect our systems. And when I talk to this group later on today, I'm going to be talking about them as the system of economic needs. But economic needs is not enough. So economic needs are, it's the housing, it's the transportation, it's the job, it's the funding. It's all those things that we need in order to exist well and exist comfortably in our society. And if those things are missing, it makes those other things harder, right? If you don't have a stable place to live, at times it can make having stable employment hard. If you don't have a stable place to live, at times your family dynamic will be consistently disrupted and difficult. If you don't have a stable place to live, at times your health may be impacted in one way or another. If you don't have a stable place to live, if you have some educational needs, how are those being met? And so we have to connect our systems, and we say the things. So I talk about how I was in a training, and it was a mandated reporter training, and the trainer said, and we need to make sure that we're connecting with other partners, and that was it. Well, what I've developed is the how. How do I connect with other partners? And the who. Who do I connect with? Like, who are these people? And so when we had the convening a couple of weeks ago, and we probably had all 10 systems in the room, and it was just such a beautiful sight, and seeing people connecting, exchanging information, because that was the purpose of it. That was the reason that we all got together in the room. It's to understand what are some connections that we can make, and how can we move forward in a way that makes sense. And so when I talk later on today, I'll be going through just what is the life of a foster care case? What does child welfare involvement mean? And how does it show up for a family? And then I'm going to be talking about some different resources that the state actually has, the federal government has, and what I've seen locally happen regarding impact. The first one that I'm going to highlight is a program that is actually it's not super new, but it's not super old. And it's through the federal government. And it's called FYI, Foster Youth to Independence. And it is a true collaboration between public housing agencies and the child welfare agency of different states. And so youth get a FYI voucher, and they are basically provided supportive services through the child welfare agency, and the youth has access to housing for 36 months, and then under certain circumstances they're able to extend it for 24 months. There's going to be a lot of different requirements, but this FYI program that is administered by the federal government but has a clear connection requirement with local agencies is such an important step for former foster youth who are aging out of the system. And then we have the John Chafee foster care program, and there's the kind of the traditional general Chafee program, and that can provide housing and rent assistance. And then there's also the ETV program, which helps with funding like career and college and technical training, and there can be like housing that can be provided in those through those pathways. However, you have to work with the local social service agency, with the state, and again, there's going to be these technical requirements. There's going to be an age cap and limit for youth, and there's just certain requirements that have to be met. And so it's so important that if you know of a youth who has been involved in the foster care system, that they just call and ask, that they just like understand what their rights are, that they understand what they have access to, so that they aren't missing out on some of these different benefits that they have. The other collaborative partnership that I recently saw in the news was the Kansas Department for Children and Families announced a $10 million housing support program. And so this came out at the beginning of 2026, and I saw this and I was like, ooh, what is this about? And it is a grant that will assist low-income Kansans at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness. And so I saw this, and it looks like it's going to be awarded it was awarded to the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, $10 million. And it provides grants and supports for those who are low income, and they have to be eligible Kansas families or at risk of experiencing homelessness in all of the 105 counties across the state. And so it's going to be ran through TANF, and the grant actually doesn't start until July 1st of 2026, and then it runs through June 30th of 2028 with a couple of options to renew. And so I saw that and I thought, whew, this is really good, because I'll tell you what, housing is a barrier. And oftentimes in child welfare, we'll say that poverty is not supposed to be a reason why children are removed from the home, but it can be a reason why children are not reintegrated into a home, back into the home. Because if a parent does not have stable housing, and stable housing can be subjective, it can be based on what other people think is stable or what other people think is suitable. And so if they don't have that, then reintegration is going to be that much more difficult, that much more delayed. And the truth is that there are lots of resources and programs and ways out of no ways that the agency is often able to do, but housing has been a thing. Like, it has been an issue. And so to see that the agency is taking this collaborative approach and connecting with an entity that does this work, I'm really hopeful and really interested to see what actually happens. And then lastly, just thinking about the local level and what we can do within our local communities. And years ago, we had a Mayor Mark Holland, and during one of his speeches, he announced that he wanted for our community to eradicate homelessness, child homelessness in our community. So he said this, and what happened was organizations began talking. And they began talking, and what they decided that they were going to do was they were going to create a place, and they were going to work through the McKinney-Vento law and work directly with school districts to understand what was the homelessness that students were experiencing, and how could Kansas City, Kansas, Turner, Piper, Bonner Springs, and Edwardsville school districts come together and make an impact. And so in 2015, Impact KCK was formed. And to date, it's been over 10 years. And to date, over 2,961 families have been reached. Over 778 families have been housed, and over 673 families have been employed. And what's beautiful about this program is that they work through the schools. They use the federal law for school districts to figure out who is actually homeless, and how can these school districts refer these students to a place. And in Kansas City, it's called Avenue of Life, and through the Impact KCK program. And so it's not just a referral and it says, okay, well, these are the things that you could do. It's a place where families can go and they can have access to housing, employment, income, food, childcare, child education, adult education, healthcare coverage, life skills, family relations, mobility, community involvement, social support, parenting skills, legal, mental health, and safety, all in one place, so that you don't have a family trying to navigate and go to 12 different places with no way to get there, right? And having to tell their story over and over and over again. You just go to one place at one time and you develop a relationship so that the navigator can stay and help the family until the youngest child graduates high school. And so they have partnered with over 90 different organizations through this collective impact model. And so it happens on every Wednesday. That's when they gather, and that's when they meet, and that's when community organizations come together. But it just shows how you can deal with homelessness on a local level. It started with the mayor saying, we want to change this. And then it trickled down, and organizations said, we can do something about this, but we know we can't do it by ourselves. And so, again, connection matters. And when we connect, when we collaborate, we can really make an impact and make a change. And so I'm excited to share with this group of folks that are committed to ending houselessness and homelessness in the state. And if you are interested in connection and how your organization can connect with others, it doesn't happen automatically. You have to be very intentional about connection, but reach out and let's talk more so that we can figure out what connection could look like for your agency, entity, and organization.